What's up, guys, and welcome to the Sunday morning special. So, since it's Sunday, it is the Lord's Day, and we're going to talk about religion. Specifically, in this, we're going to talk about Old Testament uh, Hebrew Bible. Okay, happens to be something that I am very interested in, and that I happen to know a pretty decent amount about historically, and I have been balls deep in this for a while. So I just want to go ahead and say that I believe that people are free to believe whatever they want. There's a cat in here. Hey, kitty. This is, I don't know if this is like a stray or our neighbors have cats and a lot of them are outside cats, I'm assuming. Hello, come here. Yes, I see you. I see you, the pretty cat. Anyway, so Hebrew Bible. Okay. Right. So, you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. I don't want to shit on anybody's beliefs or say that somebody's wrong. These are just happens to be the things that that I have kind of discovered throughout, this whole this whole rabbit hole of the Old Testament and yeah. So you don't have to believe what I say, though. My interest is not theological, right? So I understand the theology, but my interest is not really in the theology, so to speak. It's more in the history. Like, what do we have? What do we physically have? What do we know for certain? Yesterday, I made a video about certainty, and I'm not talking about I'm not seeking certainty on this specific subject to make myself feel better or something. This is just interest. It's interesting to me. I love history, and I've always loved history, and this happens to be some history that it seems like most people just don't know. They just don't know this. It could be because some of it's been hidden by the church or hidden by the Jewish people, or et cetera, or hidden for thousands of years, even on purpose, or something like that. So I'm not shitting on anybody's beliefs. I'm not saying you have to believe what I believe. Just happens to be the historical stuff that I found. So the biblical narrative, or what we grew up with, what I grew up with, and what most Christians would believe, and probably I don't really know a lot about Jewish religion in the sense of what they believe currently. I know more about, I guess, Israelite religion, but those aren't the same thing. So, everybody thinks that Moses wrote the Torah, right? That's what we grew up with. Even if you look in your Bible right now, it probably says, Genesis written by Moses. Well, that just happens to be probably not true. Not true at all. The artifacts say something more along the lines that the majority of the Old Testament was written either during or after the Babylonian exile, okay, as an attempt to sort of rally the troops. And this is also where, if you want to go a little bit deeper, this is also where monotheism sort of is propagated, I guess you'd say. So in the Old Testament, there's a whole pantheon of gods. We know this. All you got to do is read it. There's gods in there that are fully acknowledged. Baal, is probably the main one. There's Molech. There's some other gods, Ashtoreth or Ashtaroth. Um, so there are other gods um, that are represented in the Old Testament, and they are the worship of them is condemned in the Old Testament. So what that tells you is that there were people that were worshiping them, right? There were Israelites who were worshiping these gods, and that was condemned by probably the Levites. So the Levites are like the priest class of the Israelites. So, and probably the ones doing the writing of the Torah. Now this is, I don't know that for certain, because we're talking, if you go back into the context of what I said, that this was written post-exile or during the exile. Well, are the Levites actually, are they a thing? So the Jews aren't the Jews. The Jews, as we know them today, are not the Jews that go into the exile. So there were no Jews before the exile. The word Jew comes from Judah. So, all right. So, historically speaking, and this is also part of the Bible, is that the Israelites had a kingdom. Now that kingdom is disputed in the sense of, like, was it a kingdom, like a united kingdom, ever? Or was it more of like local kind of tribes and warlords and things, with maybe sort of a shared ancestry? But regardless of that, there were two, there was the kingdom, like you think about David, right? And then David, and then Solomon. And then after that, they have a civil war. And so they split. And so you've got two kingdoms now. You've got the northern kingdom, which is Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is Judah. And in Israel is sort of the higher class people, like, this would have been where the learned people were, like probably like the Levites, or more the upper echelon of the Israelite peoples. And then in Judah were kind of like the backwoods, Southern Hicks, like they were the kind of, what would you say, laughed at, put down. They're like the trailer park of the two kingdoms. So anyway, Israel, and this is some that we think from historical examples and writings, was that Israel, the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, was more open to different types of worship. So in it, like they would have shrines to Yahweh in different places. And they would also have, like, and these were always usually on high places, like on top of a mountain, right? And I mean, this goes all the way back to like, Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai, things like that. So they would worship gods. They would worship the gods on top of these high places. And Israel seemed more open to like the different types of worship of different deities, Baal, Ashereth, Molech, these kind of things. And the southern kingdom, Judah, was more, no, we only serve Yahweh, right? So what happens is that the Assyrians come in and they basically destroy the northern kingdom, and then sometime later the Babylonians come in. They're after the Assyrians. They kind of take over the Assyrians, and then they come in and they end up swallowing up the southern kingdom of Judah. And this is all mostly recorded in probably Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah. So then Israel, well, the Jews, it's so weird. What do you call them? What do you call these people? The Israelites. They go into captivity in Babylon. A lot of them are taken to Babylon. Some of them are not, but a lot of them go to Babylon, and eventually they are released. So, this part of the Bible narrative, a lot of this part of the Bible narrative is historically somewhat accurate in as far as like the historical record. So then they're released and they come back to the land and they rebuild Jerusalem, and then they're known as the Jews because they're mostly from the tribe of Judah. Okay, Jews, Judah. Okay, and of course this is where Jesus later comes from. It's from the line of Judah, David, all this stuff, right? The city of David, Jerusalem, all these things were in the southern kingdom in Judah, okay? And so they come back, and then, of course, they're later conquered by Alexander the Great, and they become very Hellenistic, and this is where we get the Greek, the Greek New Testament, and this is where we get Jesus spoke in Aramaic because they had these the outside influences. They're becoming less and less Israelite as time goes on, basically, and more influenced by outside forces because they no longer really have a kingdom. They're living there, but they don't really have a kingdom, right? They're just sort of like they just live there. This is historically their homeland, okay? So. And then later the Romans come in, and then, of course, we have the times of Jesus and all this stuff, right? But the Jews that come back from the exile, their religion is not the same religion that they went to Babylon with. Okay, they come back, and they you could almost say that they go into Babylon with a very kind of quasi-semi-polytheistic belief in like this pantheon of gods. And when they come back, this is when we start to get the Old Testament written down. This is when we start to get these stories of like the exile and the one true God, Yahweh, and that it's not that really that Yahweh is a God among gods or like the most powerful God among gods. It's like Yahweh is the only God. Now, that none of these gods even exist. It's only Yahweh. But we don't get that until, like if you did a timeline, assuming that the Old Testament was written, say Moses wrote in Moses's time, then you're not getting Yahweh alone worship until the end of the Old Testament. So the majority of the Old Testament, like 90% of the Old Testament, this is all in a system of polytheism, really. So Yahweh is really one God among many. It just happens to be the God of what is referred to as the Israelites. Okay. Now there is another God, El. Okay, El is sort of like the highest God, and this is even, you see that cat? This is even part of Yahweh's name becomes like El or El Shaddai or Israel. So El is always included in this kind of family upstairs making noise. In this. In this entire region, they've got multiple gods. So where did all these gods come from, and what to make of the stories in the Old Testament? So what it seems to be from the historical record is that the Jews are, I keep saying that, the Israelites are Canaanites. They're Canaanites. They're polytheistic Canaanites. And what happens is that probably around the end of the Bronze Age or in the Middle Bronze Age, you've got the Sea Peoples that come over. And look at that. And then they're referred to, the Sea Peoples that settle there, they kind of come in, and really there's the Bronze Age collapse. You've probably heard of that. And people will say this is caused by this or that. They say it's caused by global changes in climate, stuff like that. I don't really know what caused it. Nobody really does, I don't think. But anyway, there's this Bronze Age collapse where you've got Assyria, you've got Babylon, and these are smaller countries at the time. They're not the big ones that they'll become later. But you've got Assyria, you've got Babylon, you've got these different, even Egypt, and you've got these different sort of small little kingdoms, and they shrink dramatically, and they almost disappear during the Bronze Age collapse. And a lot of people think that's brought about by the Sea Peoples, and a lot of those people think that the Sea Peoples come from Phoenicia, which would be like Greece. But anyway, the Sea Peoples come over, and they sort of take what we would call now probably like Gaza and that whole area there on the Mediterranean coast, right? They're referred to as the Peliset, I think, historically, but then really what we refer to them, in Bible and even now, is they're sort of the precursors of the Philistines. And they sort of force the people that are there. There's two thoughts, that there's people already there and they come over and they sort of force the people that are there up into the hill country. So you got the plain, and then it goes up into the hill country. So this is kind of what it looks like. There's a plain, goes up into the hill country, then it dives down into the Jordan Valley. And then there's it's a valley. So there's another side, and then it goes off into like Saudi Arabia, I think. So they force these people up into the hill country that were originally there. Now, you have to understand that the reason that there was so much fighting over this land, and the reason that that there always has been, is because this is a major, major trade route in the ancient world. So you've got, like, up in Iraq, you've got modern day Iraq, you've got Babylonia, and you've got Egypt down here. Now these are pretty big players, right? And in between that is Israel, right? So this is a major trade route, and especially along the coast there, it's fought over for centuries. This is what we refer to, like, even now, this is like the Gaza Strip. This is that area along the coast there that's easily traveled. It's a trade route. So anyway, so the one line of thought is that the Sea Peoples come over and they force the people up into the hill country. The other is that the people that flee to the hill country are sort of outcasts of the Peliset people that conquer that area. So they're either outcasts of the Canaanite, like Peliset, Philistines, whatever you want to call them, or they were there and they were sort of forced up into the hill country. Okay. And there was what we would say is, in regards to like the Exodus, was that didn't happen. Like, that wasn't a thing. That there were perhaps people who did leave Egypt, either under distress, but we're not talking about like millions, or there's no mass exodus. There could be people who left Egypt and then traveled to Canaan, but these would probably be, I think, what most people would think. See, these are big holes in history, right? Could it be like the Levites? Okay, so the ones that the bringers of the law, basically. Just a little side note, if you know anything, throughout history, that the priestly class are the ones who kind of control things. For the longest time, the Roman Catholic Church was kind of they were in charge, you know what I mean? And it's we sort of all know this, that the priestly class is the one that's kind of controls people, probably mostly through, I don't know, fear, however people are controlled. Mostly it's the easiest way to control people is scare them, make them fearful. So anyway, Exodus, no, we don't, that's not really, there's no historical evidence for that. And, I have seen what people will claim is historical evidence for it, but, the majority of people who really know what they're talking about, they don't see any sort of mass exodus. Sure, was there maybe some people that left Egypt, during a famine or during whatever? Yeah, that's possible, but we're not talking about a mass exodus of people. And there's even some sign, people used to say like the Israelites were the slaves that built the pyramids and stuff like that. There's no historical evidence for any of that. There's no historical evidence that the people who built the pyramids were slaves, that they may have been actual paid contracted workers. So I think that has to go into like how they were fed and stuff like that. I'm not really sure, but what you're getting then, so if you're getting the majority of the Old Testament, which is if you look into the New Testament, then you've got the writings of Paul and Hebrews and a lot of these other the Gospels to a certain extent, but especially Paul and Hebrews, and they what they do is they tie a lot of Jesus's life or Jesus, the theology of Jesus, to events in the Old Testament. But the problem with that is that a lot of these events in the Old Testament were just made up. Okay, now that doesn't mean that these things aren't important. Okay, so people, we have modern day legends, we have modern day mythos around people that's important, because these things, mankind, I think, especially man, is important, that there's like this reaching upwards to like this greater self, right? And so you have to have, in essence, heroes, right? We've got them all throughout history, and you've got legends of heroes. Some of the heroes were real people, and that's okay. It's okay to hold up this ideal. That's perfectly okay. So like I said, a lot of the heroes of old were real people, but most often the legend that surrounded them was not real. Okay, think about George Washington and the cherry tree, or you go back like Achilles or Hercules or Samson. Who else? Like Moses, even. These heroes of old who have these great mythos around them, and the story is the important part. But the story doesn't have to be true to be important. These are the stories that we tell ourselves about how the potentiality of this human existence, and it's good to have like stories, especially where the person is humanized, right? So like you have these stories of Moses, and where Moses is very human. I mean, he kills, in the story, he kills the Egyptian guy in a fit of rage. He strikes the rock in a fit of rage. Like, he's a very human character, so you can very much identify with him. But he's also what? He's the most humble man. He's the leader of the Israelites. He's God's man. He's God's man. It's important to have these myths, because that's what the foundation of our collective consciousness is built around. Imagine if all of our mythos were like weak ass, if all of our heroes were just weak, pathetic soy boys, right? Where would we be as a civilization? You know what I mean? Like, it'd be awful. I'm assuming, I don't know. So it's important that we have these stories, and it's important that maybe it's important for you to believe these stories, but the literalness of the story it doesn't have to be literal. It doesn't have to be real, like it really happened. The story itself is enough. So, but yeah, so we've got Moses. Right, this is a mythical character that was invented to rally the troops, so to speak, Jerusalem, in and around Jerusalem, to rally the troops around Yahweh, the one God that they finally decided on. Abraham, also, these are mythological stories. Jacob and Esau, who's the one? Joseph. All of these things. These are mythological characters that tell us a story, tell us about ourselves, and help to tell the Jews, sort of a mythological narrative about who they were as a people and why they worshipped, or why they should worship, the God that they finally decided on, Yahweh. And yeah, that's probably where I'll leave it for now. But the historical evidence for the majority of the Old Testament is just not there. It's just not there. It just didn't happen. Was there a David? Was there a Saul? Was there a Solomon? These things, you can prove these things through history, though there's very little. There's very, very little. But, were these people real? They were probably real, yeah. But is the narrative around their life, was that a true story? No, probably not. David and Goliath? Probably not. Did David kill a Philistine? Yeah, probably. I mean, we would assume that his kingdom, if you want to call it a kingdom, was in constant battle with the other Canaanite tribes. And was there a big Philistine that was 9 foot tall or whatever? I guess it's possible. We have evidence of people being super freakishly tall. There's super freakishly tall people even today. Man, I saw one at Walmart. Man, I was like, oh my God. Like, I'm a short guy, but like, I was like, there was this guy, and I've seen him around town, I think, a time or two. I don't know who he is, but he's like, oh my God, like, this dude is like weirdly tall. It's like I come up to like his hips. That's wild, dude. That is fucking wild. It's kind of like scary, but also kind of sad, because you're like, damn, that must, like, everybody wants to be taller until you're this guy, and you're like, God, I wish I was shorter. Like, I mean, what the hell, dude? I wonder what size shoe he wears. This dude's probably got like a size 22 shoe or something. He has to, like, I mean, imagine it. You have to order everything custom. You can't drive like a normal car. You got to drive, I don't know, like a damn Hummer or something, or like a, expedition, or something. I don't know, but like a bicycle, where you had to have like your bicycle seat like all the way up, like, or maybe not even have a seat because it just didn't work out for you. I don't know. Wild. Imagine what he'd look like on a motorcycle. You know what I mean? Like, it had to be like the biggest ass motorcycle of all time. Okay, all right. Yeah, that's enough. But I think I might start doing these Sunday specials and talk about some religion, because it's kind of what I'm into right now. Maybe one day I'll be into something else, but I love history, and I love the history of these religions. And this one happens to be one that a lot of people either neglect or don't know or have lied about, or it's just been covered up, one or the other. That's enough.